This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
Good morning. Today, Canadian students in university and college are facing a summer jobs crisis. In June 2008, before the financial downturn, 71% of students in their early 20s, or more than 7 out of 10 students, had a summer job. Today, it's only 63%. That's almost 10 points lower. In fact, last month, Canada had the worst rate of summer employment for this group since Stats Canada first started collecting this data back in 1977. Stephen Harper likes to point to the so-called economic recovery in Canada. But the fact is that this so-called recovery is leaving an entire generation behind. Students are now competing for part-time entry-level work with senior citizens who can't afford to retire, and with middle-aged workers who've lost their full-time jobs and seen them replaced by part-time work. Students, now with no work experience to count on, are getting squeezed out. The immediate effects of lower student employment are clear. A growing number of students are struggling to pay for their education. They're racking up unsustainable levels of debt in the process. Today, just over half of Canadians aged 20 to 29 years of age continue to live at home with their parents. In 1998, it was less than 1 in 3 Canadians that age who lived at home with their parents. A growing number of young Canadians simply can't afford to move out on their own. When university and college students cannot find summer work, they not only miss out on the money they need to pay tuition and to have a place of their own, but they're also missing out on the work experience they need to succeed. Yesterday, the OECD released its annual employment outlook, which showed that youth employment has not recovered since the 2008 global recession. The OECD talks about a so-called scarring effect on persistent unemployment for youth. It says this is, quote, of particular concern because unemployment and other labor market difficulties encountered early in their working lives can jeopardize their long-term career paths and future earnings prospects. The Harper Conservatives risk leaving an entire generation of young Canadians behind with persistently weak youth job creation. The Liberal Party of Canada believes the federal government has a responsibility to ensure that Canadian youth have opportunities to succeed, to have a good start. But despite the evidence of persistently weak job numbers for students, the Conservatives have frozen the Canada Summer Jobs program for the last 3 years. And since 2006, funding for the Canada Summer Jobs program hasn't even kept up with inflation. The reality is that in 2006, the Canada Summer Jobs program created over 47,000 student jobs. This year, the Conservatives' press release itself states that the program will only create up to 36,000 jobs. So let's put this in perspective. While the youth jobs market is getting worse, the Conservatives are doing less. They have slashed support for summer jobs, student summer jobs, by over 11,000 jobs, a reduction by almost a quarter. Again, during a student job crisis, Stephen Harper has cut 11,000 summer jobs for students. Stephen Harper is telling Canadian students and their families, you're on your own. Instead of cutting job opportunities for Canadian students, the government should recognize the fact that Canadian students face a job crisis and invest in a real plan. The Conservatives should accept responsibility and show leadership. Canada needs their government to provide a coherent youth job strategy. Here are some of the things this government could be doing and could do immediately. 1, create a hiring tax credit that is dedicated to hiring Canadian youth so that employers have an added incentive to give young Canadians their first work experience. 2, increase funding for the Canada Summer Jobs program instead of slashing the number of student jobs that it creates. 3, reopen the summer youth job centers that the Conservatives actually closed last year. These job centers provide students not only with information, but also with guidance and mentorship to help them out. Many of these students are new to the labor market, and they need help in finding that first job. There are real costs to inaction. Doing nothing makes post-secondary education less attainable and less affordable. It makes it tougher for young Canadians to get real work experience. And cutting the number of jobs in the Canada Summer Jobs programs hurts community organizations, from food banks to recreation halls to museums, that rely on this program to deliver services. This is the first generation of Canadians that is expected not to do as well in life as their parents. The Harper Conservatives are piling it on and making it worse for this generation at a time when the government has a responsibility to take action and to give young Canadians hope for the future.
I think the Conservatives would say that they've cut corporate taxes. So what would the hiring credit do on top of lowering corporate tax cuts?
Well, there's no evidence to suggest that cutting corporate taxes further actually created directly employment at the time. In fact, to the contrary, our job numbers overall are still worse than they were 4 years ago. And beyond that, we've seen a significant replacement, or a significant trend of the replacement of full-time work with part-time jobs. Again, the youth employment numbers are for the month of June are the worst we've seen for summer students seeking summer employment since 1977. So obviously, simply cutting corporate taxes isn't enough. We believe that a targeted tax credit aimed at encouraging employers to hire summer students would make a difference, would help. Further, we believe that restoring the summer job centres that the Conservatives cut and increasing funding for the Canada Summer Jobs program would be important. It's important to recognize that during a time when there's a youth summer jobs crisis, and that youth unemployment is high, the Conservatives actually have reduced by almost a quarter the number of jobs they create through the Canada Summer Jobs program. So the Conservatives are actually doing less at a time when Canadian students need more.
Okay. What kind of hiring credit would you outline?
Well, we believe that, first of all, a tax credit and a tax credit that cuts the cost for employers to hire students would make a difference. And ultimately, we do have tax credits, payroll tax credits. We do have a number of tax credits that are used from time to time to encourage employment. We believe those should be targeted towards summer employment. We don't believe that the cost would be that high for this. In fact, the cost of inaction is far higher, and the cost in the future of a lost generation of Canadian youth with inaccess to, or lack of access to employment, summer employment, and that important first job is that's Canada's action plan at work right there. But unfortunately, there aren't too many students working there, I guess. But
Okay. Any more questions? Samantha Bayard from the Straight Goods News.
With the changes to EI affecting seasonal workers, there'll be more seasonal work available to students because of the EI changes, a lot of those workers will be in in full year positions at places like McDonald's.
It's important to realize that one of the factors that is making it tougher for Canadian students to get summer jobs is the reality that a lot of middle-aged people are competing for those same part-time jobs now, as you've referenced, and that in some cases seniors are working longer because they have to work longer. A lot of them have lost their retirement savings, and that Conservatives, again, with the changes to OAS, are penalizing some of Canada's most vulnerable seniors. So I believe that, in fact, in addition to the regressive decision to reduce the number of Canada Summer Jobs created by the program, the changes to OAS and the changes to EI have the capacity to make things even worse for Canadian students to find summer jobs. Volunteering is laudable and important and good for communities, but it doesn't pay necessarily the tuition in the fall or help a student pay for their living expenses. And although volunteering is good for experience and is important, it still doesn't provide that absolutely essential work experience that can make a huge difference in the future for the student as they begin their full-time career. I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the summer jobs that were created by the Canada Summer Jobs Program are in the nonprofit sector. Little museums in rural and small town Canada, recreation centers, the nonprofit sector. These are the groups who often apply for and receive summer students. So this program actually is quite a good program because it not only gives them work experience, but it helps that volunteer sector to which you refer. The cut to Katimavik represents another attack on the opportunities that young Canadians enjoy. And it also represents a reduction in the resources and services offered to communities in Canada. Katimavik benefited a lot of communities, a lot of community-based organizations and volunteer organizations, and helped build community infrastructure while giving young Canadians vital public service and, in fact, job experience. So, again, it represents a part of an overall policy and vision of the Conservatives that you're on your own. If you're having challenges, you're on your own under the Conservatives. Whether you're a vulnerable senior or somebody who's unemployed as a student, or somebody who's lost their full-time job and seen it replaced by part-time work, the Conservative message is you're on your own. And we believe that there's in addition to the social cost, in time there will be a very significant economic cost to losing a generation of Canadian students. Again, in June, the student employment numbers for Canadian students seeking summer work were the worst we've seen in Canada since 1977. I can tell you from my own experience and growing up and as a summer student during high school and university, I was able to find not just one, but in some cases a full-time summer job, and in addition to part-time work beyond that. And I do believe that the level of opportunity that I had then, not only to make money but to get some experience, is far greater than that Canadian students have today. And I think we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to try to do our best to ensure that the generations we represent today have at least as good an opportunity and ideally better opportunities than we had.